Walk the dogs, school drop-off, meetings from 10 to 3, take kids to soccer, then no time left for a jog.
When everyone else is relying on you, it's easy to put your needs last. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist online, so you can show up for yourself the way you do for others. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/positive.
What you watch depends on what kind of mood you're in. Sometimes you're craving comedies like Friends or South Park, and sometimes you're more into dramas like HBO's Succession and House of the Dragon. There's also cooking shows like Chopped and Beat Bobby Flay, and even movies like The Lord of the Rings and Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Well, Max is the streaming destination that has the best of entertainment for whatever mood you're in anytime. And plans start at as little as $9.99 a month. Max, the one to watch. Subscription required. Visit max.com.
All right. Welcome back in. Sports Daily. Here we go. Jacob Albrock, Paul Savage. We're making our way through hour number 2 of this Tuesday. You missed the news. Lauren Hibbs and staff out at Wichita State. National search is underway. You can chime in on that. You can comment on our video streams, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. You can call us on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. Let's talk a little NFL football, Paul. We haven't had a chance to talk about DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think, since he's become a free agent. Now, there's a report out that there really were only 2 suitors for him in the trade market, and it was the Bills or the Chiefs with any substantive talks with Arizona at the time. The price tag was too high, seemingly, which made sense at the time, right? We all talked about that and how Hopkins made a lot of sense, but what could you give up to get him? And he's an expensive player. Well, now he's just an expensive player, right? Now there is nothing you have to give up because the Cardinals cut him. And you can get him for money, and that's it. You don't have to have any draft capital. And so obviously in that scenario, for a player of his caliber, even at his advanced age, and even at his price tag, there are probably going to be plenty of suitors now for DeAndre Hopkins. Now, he has stated multiple times his desire to play for a contender, for a quarterback that's really good and cares about the game, shots fired at Kyler Murray, all that kind of stuff. So knowing that a lot of teams are going to be interested in DeAndre Hopkins, assuming the price tag, and we don't know how that could get negotiated out. But, Paul, if the Chiefs could maneuver it and get him in there, how much sense do you think that makes, and how much urgency do you think there needs to be to explore that for the Chiefs, or are they fine without it and they don't need to pay him that much money? And where do you sit with DeAndre Hopkins?
Well, I saw an article this morning that was basically written within the last 12 hours. And it states that there's still the 2 teams that are interested are the Bills and the Chiefs. So that's an update.
No, I don't.
That's an update.
I think that's just who was. I think that's just who was going to trade for him. I think there's way more teams now.
Well, now there are, but that's what I saw this morning. But with that being said, this guy does have some baggage. There's a couple small bags attached, and so when you look at this guy, you think to yourself, well, who's equipped to handle somebody like this when they come onto the team, when they join the team, when they're in the locker room, when they're in the weight room, when they're on the field, when they're on the practice field, when they're on the plane going to a game? Who is this guy? Is he somebody that can enhance our program? And of all the programs in the NFL that could handle a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, it would be I think the Chiefs. Because we've seen how they handle people they perceive that's a problem. They get rid of them. Do I need to mention Tyreek Hill comes to mind right off the get-go?
I don't think they get rid. I think the guys generally go there and just they don't have a problem. Like Frank Clark had some problems away from the field, but as a player and in the locker room,
right,
he seemed like he was fine. Like he fit in. So did Tyreek Hill, and Tyreek Hill had far more baggage coming in than even Frank Clark did. Whatever, I guess that's debatable, but they didn't necessarily get rid of Tyreek Hill. They drew their line in the sand and said we're not going to invest our money and make you the highest paid receiver. Tyreek Hill was phenomenal and still has been, by the way, phenomenal since he left. It wasn't, but if they're not, and that's where this really comes into play. Like how much for how long is DeAndre Hopkins going to cost you? So his contract is kind of like just this year. And here's where I'm fascinated by the DeAndre Hopkins situation. Like if is Hopkins himself ready to go right now and make as much money as he can this season? Or would he potentially be willing, right, to sort of have a prove it kind of year, maybe? It's an interesting situation with DeAndre Hopkins. And he's a free agent in 2025. But I don't, like, the NFL contracts get so complicated that I don't know, like, what can still be managed out of this contract, how much is actually owed, I should say. Like, if a team signs him, how much wiggle room and creativity is there with that? Like, it's all very tricky. And the Chiefs don't have much money. They have the smallest wiggle room in their cap space of any team in the NFL. They have like $1 million, and guess who's second to last? The Bills, right? So the two teams who could definitely use a player of his caliber to put him over the edge can't afford him in their current, can't afford him in the current market. Teams like the Bears, the Panthers, the Colts, the Lions, they all have some money. The Jets, by the way, which is really interesting. The Texans. I think the Browns become a relatively interesting team in this, a potential reunion with Deshaun Watson. I just don't know because I don't fully have a grasp on what it's going to cost you to do it. Like, what do you have to pay all of that money right now? Because that's going to take a lot of teams out of the mix. Or is there flexibility and creativity there? Because it's going to have to take that for these premier teams to even consider it.
Yeah, and all those teams are going to take those kind of things into consideration. The one consideration that we haven't talked about yet is obviously DeAndre Hopkins' mindset on how important is a ring to him. Is it the Bills? Is it the Chiefs? Are these two teams that you would want to go to? I think both these teams will be contenders over the course of the next few years as to winning a Super Bowl championship. And Hopkins is 30 years old. I mean, he's had a nice career. But it's been a fairly long career in terms of, the years played in the NFL. How bad does he want to ring? How bad does he want to play for a contender? How bad does he want to be in the playoffs and try to win that elusive ring? Because the ring is so important to so many players. I get it. I know why. I understand that. But I think this is also interesting with regards to his mindset. Does he want to go where the money is? Does he want to go have a chance to win a championship? I think those are questions that we don't know yet. We don't know where his mind is. Perhaps he's made enough money in his career where, he'll take maybe a little less. And it's not like he's going to take a fortune less. He's going to take a little less maybe to sign with one of the teams that have a shot. And maybe that's where he is in his life. Maybe it's not totally about, the biggest payday I can get. Maybe it's not about that. So I think there's still some questions out there that we need to know the answers to, and maybe even there's some questions that DeAndre Hopkins has to ask himself. I think that's going to be the interesting part, but there's a lot about this story we don't know. And like you said, we don't know who all is going to hop into the fray to try to sign this guy. I mean, he's a player. I mean, he can be a difference maker. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But I've got a feeling he might want to go try to win a ring. That's the feeling I get about this whole story. I could be wrong. But that's the feeling I get.
I don't know either. I think there's two teams that could probably afford it better than others that are desperate enough that three teams, I'll say three, that he could justify that are good enough to win a Super Bowl that he feels like could put him over the edge. They're all in the AFC, which is interesting.
They're all there. Yeah, they're all three of them.
The Jets, the Ravens, and the Browns. They could all probably figure out a way to do it financially. And all three of them, not as much the Ravens in the sense of, like, they're all in and got to push all the chips in. The Ravens are, to me, to a lesser degree than the Browns and the Packers. Because the Ravens, yes, they just paid their quarterback, but I don't think anybody felt like the Ravens were pushing all their chips into the middle right now with Lamar Jackson. Like, that's a long-term play. The Jets have absolutely pushed it all into the middle of the table. So does DeAndre Hopkins come in and help them? Sure he does. And like, if you're making the moves that the Jets are making now and it's just money that it costs you to bring him in, why on earth would you not consider it, right? A player like him, even as he's older now, and receivers don't age well, but, outside of a couple injuries, he's been durable, he's been reliable, and he's one of the great receivers in the game the last decade or so. And then the Browns, for a less smart reason than the Jets, pushed all their chips into the table with Deshaun Watson, but they still did it. And if you're trying to have Deshaun Watson succeed, they have Amari Cooper there now. They just traded for Elijah Moore, who's a very talented young player. They've got money. Why wouldn't you think about bringing in Deshaun Watson for a year or two of reuniting with his former quarterback who they've had success together? And I don't know what their relationship's like. I know they had success together. But to me, those are the three teams that feel the most urgency to do it. I don't think that the Chiefs or the Bills have to do it. I think no matter whether they do it or anybody else does it, those are still the two favorites to win the Super Bowl this year, with Cincinnati right there with them. The three favorites, we'll call it. But I would still say the Chiefs and the Bills are probably more of a favorite even. But we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Hopkins has said he wants to go to a contender basically with good quarterback. And that does limit the options, right? I've heard the Lions as a dark horse candidate. The Lions are interesting, but is Jared Goff, what makes sense for DeAndre Hopkins? I don't know. This is going to be, we don't see this happen very often. And we have some big time, names still in free agency like Ezekiel Elliott, but I don't think people generally feel like Ezekiel Elliott has much left in the tank. Everybody, I think, feels like DeAndre Hopkins has enough left in the tank to have these conversations for sure.
Right. Well, I think you're right. However, I look at Detroit Lions, and the reason I kind of poo-poo that is that, Dan Campbell's kind of that old school type coach. I don't picture DeAndre.
They want to run the ball.
They want to run the ball. They want to be physical. They want to hit you in the mouth. I don't picture DeAndre Hopkins as finding that spot quite as readily with the Lions based upon who they are mentally, who they want to be, and what they want to do on the field. So I'm not sure that I'm buying the Lions. Now watch the guy sign with the Lions and prove me wrong. But the point is that I look at the Chiefs and I look at the Bills and I think to myself, you want to play for a contender. There's two teams that will contend, and both teams that really could use your services. I think that's a no-brainer. I'm not convinced about the Browns, and I'm certainly not convinced with the Ravens. And both those have what you would call a top 10 type quarterback. Both those franchises are top 10 quarterbacks. But, you only get a chance to play with Allen and with the Chiefs. With those kind of guys, a Mahomes and an Allen are two special
Yeah, but
players.
They can't. Man, that you'd have to take such a pay cut. Here's the other part of that.
Well, I don't know what's how much. How much is how much? I'm not sure.
They don't have any money. They don't have any money on the cap right now, and his contract is for this year. It's like $20 million almost. Like, I don't know, how much of a pay cut is a pay cut, right? Like, are you his salary right now? He signed a 2-year, $50 million contract, $54 million contract. His average salary is $27 million. So there's a massive difference between what they can afford currently and what he's scheduled to make, I think. So there's two parts of that make it seem unlikely. And I initially said, and I tweeted this right when it happened, that he's going to be a Chief. And that was based on, if you remember way back, the odds-on favorite, before there were even official trade demands, there were odds made, and the Chiefs were pretty handily the odds-on favorite to get him if he were to get traded. And I've always filed that away because Vegas is rarely wrong, and I've just sort of filed it away. And then I think, if there's ever a prove it, if you want to go prove it and get another longer-term deal, the Chiefs are the place you go. But the finances were a little bit different then, and I've sort of backed off that thought since I put the thought out there, because I just don't know how financially on either side it could work. If it can, boy, it makes a ton of sense for both sides.
Right.
Because both, Hopkins would benefit greatly from playing with Mahomes, and the Chiefs could use that sort of a weapon. Because think about the receivers they do have. They don't have a true outside threat at receiver like Hopkins would provide them. It'll be interesting. I think the possibility exists still because I think it's always been there and there's been a clear desire from both parties. But it'll be tough. It'll be difficult, especially now that he's going to have the option probably just to go to the highest bidder. So we'll see. DeAndre Hopkins is a free agent. That doesn't happen very often, Paul. You don't usually see guys like him become free agents like that very often.
Yeah, but you're talking about a guy with a $22 million, hit on the cap. I mean, that's significant, my friend. That is significant.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back. More Sports Daily coming up for you right after this.